a man called Granny. On the island flow, come boom.
Yes, there is no need for to force no more. Cause it flow, come up plan, you're paying less for more.
Flow got a new combo plan. You can call anyone, no matter which network you they on. Just use your flow.
Dial star 129 number sign to activate your combo plan today.
This is an unprecedented announcement from Horsebums. Get up to $30,000 off and pay zero VAT on top of that. It's Horseman's Automotive Unprecedented Sales Event happening now. Yes, for the first time ever, you get up to $30,000 off and pay zero VAT on top of that. Yes, pay zero VAT and get up to $30,000 off on top of that. This has never been seen before. Unprecedented savings at the Unprecedented Auto Sales Event at Horsewoods Automotive. Up to $30,000 off and pay zero VAT on top of that. Let me repeat, up to $30,000 off and pay zero VAT on top of that. Don't miss it. It's unprecedented. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back to Voices for today, Thursday, June 25th. Getting to this mix up there. I'm your host, Jermaine Abel. For today, it's an open mic. I like to engage with the public and hear your views, thoughts, and opinions on anything of national importance that you think, is worth discussing here on Voices. A couple of things I'll throw out there to begin with. We had the Premier Mark Brantley hosting his first press conference since elections and his first in quite some time since COVID-19. And he shared some ideas, thoughts, discussions on some interesting topics as he engaged reporters there on Nevis today. Our very own Ken Richards was up there this morning, and he had some interesting questions for the Premier, including where is the Charleston Accord and where that's at this point in time in the second term of the Team Unity Coalition administration. A topic or something that's of interest is we know that St. Kitts and Nevis has to be reopened, the borders has to be reopened at some point in time. When do you think that is, or that should be, when we should reopen the borders here in St. Kitts and Nevis to allow flights and tourists and nationals of St. Kitts and residents to return to the islands in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and what we've been seeing in the U.S. and the better part of Europe? And we go to the phone lines. We actually have a caller here. Caller, good morning. Good afternoon, rather.
Yes, good afternoon. I listened to Premier Brantley's press conference, and I had the same concern as I've had all along. A reporter asked about the plans for the way forward post-COVID-19, and he basically deferred to the federal government's plans. The problem here is that the federal government does not seem to have a plan either, right? Both the NIA and the federal government seem to be essentially winging it. And as expected, when one of the reporters, who was also a candidate in the last election, touted his manifesto, that is the NRP's manifesto and plans, and asked for Premier Brantley's manifesto, he again deferred to the Team Unity's manifesto, right? And again, if you look at the Team Unity's manifesto, they don't mention much about post-COVID either, okay? And so here we are stuck in the middle of the ocean with no charts to guide the way forward, and a captain who is just hoping for good weather and not preparing the queue for what it lies ahead. And what is even more unfortunate is the Premier's response to Mr. Hanley was the reporter in question, John Hanley. He, in response to his suggestion that Mr. Hanley's ideas be looked at, Mr. Brantley was very dismissive and pointing out the fact that the Nevis populace chose the CCM in a fair contest. Okay? They made pronouncement, he said, on who they wish to lead them, and so things like they basically rejected issues like the double salary of federal ministers and those sorts of things. In other words, what Mr. Brantley was saying was that the electorate in Nevis gave them carte blanche, a blank check, to do what they will. And I think that's the fundamental mistake of politicians who win elections. It is not that the electorate felt that some things that they were doing is not right. It's just that they considered that other things were more important. Okay? And I think the winners are doing a disservice to the electorate when they are not presenting their plans for the future. Right? So Mr. Brantley basically passing off this things like, is the stimulus going to continue? Because I think this is the last month of it, at least the one that they initially announced from Social Security with 3 months payment. He basically passed that off to, well, you know, the Prime Minister and the federal government, and that can't be reassuring at all. You know, you'd think that, I mean, he won 3 seats, and therefore he should have some say in what happens, certainly in respect to Nevis. Okay, so I didn't quite like it. And so
I see what you're talking about, Carla, but I am of the belief that it's going to be something that would be, Premier Brantley can outline what he wants, but at the end of the day, it would have to be a collective decision made by Cabinet in terms of the way forward for COVID-19.
Yes, but you'd think that if a reporter asks him a question about specifically what he would like to see, just like how, for instance, he asked him, Mr. Brantley had basically said that the decision to reopen the borders would be a federal one. But the reporter pressed. When he pressed, he did give some ideas as to when he thinks that this would be necessary. Well, he's minister, I think, of aviation. Anyway, so he should have some input. What I'm saying is he should have ideas to present as well, not just pass them off to the federal government. Shouldn't that be the case?
I would think he has ideas.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what the report was asking him for. So some idea of what his plans, what he would like to see going forward. To me, that's a reasonable request of any leader, of any politician. Okay, and he was doing it in specific reference to Nevis, which I think is a press conference held in Nevis. He's the Premier of Nevis. The reporter was within his rights to ask him questions like that, I would think. And he should not have been allowed to just defer them over to the federal government. You know, you can't have it both ways. You can't be Premier of Nevis, right, and then say, well, it depends on what happens over in St. Kitts. Right? I don't think that's what the Nevis electorate expected.
I understand, Carla. I understand. But I just want to ask you a quick question. On the topic of reopening of the borders, when do you think we should do that? And what are your views in terms of how we go about dealing with that specific area? Because it's inevitable. And then we've taken into account what we've seen in Antigua. There may not be an outbreak per se on the island, but these are imported cases. And you know that specific threat is always there.
Right. And Miami is one of our main gateways, and we see that the numbers in Florida have been increasing. So, yes, it's a risk. Obviously, we can't keep it closed forever. I've always said that we should be dealing with benchmarks from the outset. For instance, I said that as soon as we saw our neighbors contracting cases, we should have closed our borders, and then we would not have had to deal with any cases at all, as you would observe, because we didn't have many. In the eventuality, we didn't have many. Okay, so we should have benchmarks. Now we should be looking carefully at what happens to our neighbors as well. Again, right? Antigua has opened up. They've been contracting cases. I wouldn't rush to open the borders either. Okay, I would wait a bit longer and see what happens there. In the meantime, I develop the protocols necessary when they do open. And it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. I mean, I don't think we can treat citizens coming back in the same way as we, as we treat temporary residents like the medical students, or for that matter, the tourists who just come in for a week, 2 at most. All these things have to be looked at. And we also have to look at the fact that we can't treat tourists from England, say, who is coming on British areas, as the same way we treat those coming from the U.S., which is still a hot spot. So all those things, those protocols need to be worked out, and it will be better if they worked out regionally, so that we can at least open regionally first. Okay, since it's under control regionally, at least open regionally first. Okay, before we open to international flights. That's the way I see it. But it's definitely a tiered system, and we should definitely be working on the protocols and benchmarks so that we know that, well, if we open our borders, let's say to 1 or 2 flights, and the numbers that come in with the virus are manageable, then we can go a step further. Okay, I don't think it's a one-shot thing where you just open the borders and anything goes, right? I mean, we'll be asking for trouble then. So, but these are things, that's what I'm talking about, plans. These are things that should have been worked out, and I'm sure they're being worked on, but I think we're behind the eight ball.
Yeah, they're actually being worked upon. I know at not the one last evening, but last week, when new Minister of Health Akila Byron Nisbet was speaking, she did say that she met with the officials from the Health Emergency Operations Center, and they were, at the time, which was the morning, she spoke the evening, she said when she met with them the morning, they were actually drafting a plan for the reopening of the borders. So it's
and I'm saying that we should have had that already, because obviously people would have to prepare, right? I mean, you can't just say, like how they were doing with the lockdown hours, come overnight, come the day before, and decide that, well, the hours are going to be changed. Up to now, we still have a curfew, why I don't know, but we still have a curfew. I don't know how you invite tourists to an island with a curfew.
Okay, Carl, if you could just do 30 seconds, I have to go pay some bills.
Basically, I don't know how you could invite people to come to your island for a visit, and you're under state of emergency and curfew. Things like that, I think, all those things need to be put on a timeline, and people know, and people plan the way going forward. Okay, then.
Thanks, caller. That was our caller just expressing his opinions on reopening of the borders, as well as Premier Branty's press conference this morning. But we have to go acknowledge our partners, Rams, SL Horsfords and Company, and Flow.
WINN is 98.9. 98.9 is Win FM.
Buster, roll it up, meet the thirst quencher in my cup. If you have one, hold it up and say, Buster for the colors in my life. Refreshing and nice, and I drink that what we like. Buster, you're full of vibes, living for the color. And I'm black and white, we do what we like. We live to enjoy life. Buster, hold it up, different flavor. Load it up. If you have one, hold it up and say, Buster for the colors in my life.
This is an unprecedented announcement from Horseman's. Get up to $30,000 off and pay 0 VAT on top of that. It's Horseman's Automotive Unprecedented Sales Event happening now. Yes, for the first time ever, you get up to $30,000 off and pay 0 VAT on top of that. Yes, pay 0 VAT and get up to $30,000 off on top of that. This has never been seen before. Unprecedented savings at the Unprecedented Auto Sales Event at Horseman's Automotive. Up to $30,000 off and pay 0 VAT on top of that. Let me repeat, up to $30,000 off and pay 0 VAT on top of that. Don't miss this, it's unprecedented. Terms and conditions apply.
Flow helps you stay connected to what matters. Simple plans and a better network mean that you can enjoy 30 days of unlimited social messaging, 10 gigabytes of reliable data to use as you like, and 1,000 local anywhere calls and texts with the always-on prepaid plan, all for $100. Keep your number when you switch to St. Kitts' most reliable LTE network. Switch to Flow. It only gets better.
Welcome back to Voices for today, Thursday, June 25th, rather. I keep getting the days mixed up here. Well, it's coming on to the end of the work week. That's if you work from Mondays to Fridays. But nevertheless, we're here on Voices and we're discussing the reopening of the borders and the announcement coming out of Antigua and Barbuda that they reopened their borders and they have somewhere about 39 confirmed cases of the coronavirus. So how do we here in St. Kitts and Nevis treat something like that in light of the fact that we have to reopen the borders at some point in time during the course of the year? So that's our focus for the remainder of the program. And you could call and share your thoughts and views on how do you see us here in St. Kitts and Nevis reopening our borders, and how do we prepare for the second wave here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We know we heard Premier Brantley at his press conference earlier today. Yes, he was basically outlining the fact that it's a federal response in terms of the COVID-19 and reopening of the borders here in St. Kitts and Nevis. You know, we're a tourism-dependent region, and at the end of the day, we have to reopen the borders at some point in time. So how do we deal with that is the critical matter right now. Additionally, we still have the issue with the Haitian nationals who are here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and how do we deal with them is the other big topic and big talking point of today. Added to that, we heard last evening from the chief medical officer that returning nationals here in St. Kitts and returning nationals and those coming to St. Kitts and Nevis will have to pay a US $500 fee to cover their cost while they're going to be in quarantine for 14 days. Remember, anybody who's coming into St. Kitts and Nevis will have to do a mandatory 14-day quarantine. Well, as it relates to, we have a caller on the line. Okay, we didn't get that caller, but what we will be doing now, though, is we will jump across to hear what the Chief Immigration Officer, Ms. Mercy News, had to say last evening as it pertains to the arrest of those 10 nationals of Haiti who are here in the Federation. So we'll go straight across to hear what she had to say.
Good afternoon, all. I know that everyone have been hearing about the Haitians who would have descended on our shores on Monday. The information that we got the information on Monday. The police would have executed a search warrant in the Keys community and found 10 Haitians in a house and in the mountainside of Keys. They were handed over to the immigration department as they entered the country illegally, So they're illegal migrants. They're all males. We found, well, as I said before, we had 10 in the early part of Monday, and by evening we had 12, and yesterday morning we found another one. So we now have 13 adult male Haitians in immigration/police custody. The police and immigration continues our investigations. We would like to inform or to appeal to the general public that if you see something, say something. We've been hearing rumors over the last few months that persons are coming in by sea. Our borders are porous. We hear that all the time, that our borders are open, they're porous, and so getting in sometimes could be a little easier than for some countries that do not have the nice lush beaches that we do. And so it's easy for illegal smuggling and trafficking to take place. And so we're asking persons, if you see something, instead of just taking pictures and posting it on Facebook, you have the police emergency 911. You can call and you can relay that information so that all the security forces and social partners can get involved. I would like to say that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was informed of this activity, and so they will be in communication with the Foreign Affairs of Haiti to discuss what the next step would be. I'm here for any questions that may be asked. And again, I would like to appeal. We are in a pandemic. We want to ensure that our citizens are safe, and that is why every passenger who comes through our legal ports that are still, our borders that are still closed, but our citizens are allowed to come home, and every single one of them have to be quarantined and tested. And if we are doing that to ensure that our people remain safe, if persons are allowed to enter our borders illegally, then we're leaving ourselves wide open to any possibility. So I'm appealing to the general public, because St. Kitts and Nevis, we have persons living around the coast throughout both islands, so you can see things. And so when you see something that looks illegal, please call and report it. All right? We have to help each other. And having said that, thanks. Good afternoon.
Well, there you heard it. That was Chief Immigration Officer Merceline Hughes saying, if you see something, say something. You know, this is what the second time they're about. So we need to make a determination on how they or the immigration officials need to make a determination on how do they treat these Haitian nationals at the moment when it comes to them being here in St. Kitts and Nevis illegally. But at this point in time, we'll quickly go pay some bills and we'll come right back with Voices here on Win FM.
We're different. We're 98.9. 98.9 Win FM.
Flo's new combo plan, the people's plan.
Sometimes a new combo plan. You can call anyone, no matter which network you dey on. Just use your Flow.
I want a combo, but not for my belly. I feel me cell phone, so me call anybody. Call Mr. Man, call Granny. On the island, Flow, come me.
Yes, there is no need for to force no more. Cause with Flow combo plan, you're paying less for more.
Flow got a new combo plan. You can call anyone, no matter which network you dey on. Just use your Flow.
Dial star 129 number sign to activate your combo plan today.
This is an unprecedented announcement from Hospitals. Get up to $30,000 off and pay zero VAT on top of that. It's Hospitals Automotive Unprecedented Sales Event happening now. Yes, for the first time ever, you get up to $30,000 off and pay zero VAT on top of that. Yes, pay zero VAT and get up to $30,000 off on top of that. This has never been seen before. Unprecedented savings at the Unprecedented Auto Sales Event at Horswoods Automotive. Up to $30,000 off and pay zero VAT on top of that. Let me repeat, up to $30,000 off and pay zero VAT on top of that. Don't miss this. It's unprecedented. Terms and conditions apply.
Mustn't forget the bop.
I see you like bop too.
If I'm cleaning the garage, I need bop.
One bop for the home and one for the office.
Bop insecticide, preferred for its proven performance. Bop's fast-acting, long-lasting. Bop stops both flying and crawling insects. Get serious. Get Bop.
Like us on Facebook, www.facebook.com/ramsupermarket. Follow us on Twitter, www.twitter.com/ramsupermarket. And subscribe to us on YouTube, www.youtube.com/ramsupermarket.
Welcome back to Voices for today, Thursday, June 25th. I'm Jermaine Abel, and we're looking at the reopening of the borders here in St. Kitts and Nevis, which is inevitable, and how do we prepare for the influx of tourists and still trying to prevent an outbreak of the COVID-19 virus here on the island of St. Kitts and on the islands of St. Kitts and Nevis, Well, currently we don't have any active cases, and then when we look at those two islands the island that we opened, our good neighbor Antigua and Barbuda, we would have seen they currently have about 39 positive cases, and they were all imported cases, and they reopened their borders recently, had flights coming in from the United States and so forth. And then we had the dreaded news yesterday, or Tuesday, rather, that 39 people tested positive. So how do we prevent something like that? Do you think we should reopen our borders at this point? When do you think, and how should we deal with that? There's this discussion or talk that we should begin by having intra-regional travel and use those regional travelers as a precursor to what can be had in terms of, or what can be expected when the borders do reopen. I know some of the islands are having people do staycations in order to have the hotel sector up and running, the bars, and some islands have nightclubs and so forth, in terms of a preparation for when the major tourism season reopens and the borders are fully open and have flights entering. And we know last evening the CMO disclosed, which is a big talking point, and some people were talking about it even before it was announced last evening, that people returning to St. Kitts and Nevis or coming to the island or entering the island would have to pay a US $500 fee upon entry into St. Kitts and Nevis as part of their mandatory quarantine. So do you think that's enough? Do you think that's too little? What's your opinion? We've seen some back and forth in terms of the story that was done, last evening here on Win FM's website. People have been sharing mixed views on that specific topic. It must be noted that CMO Laws did disclose last evening that you have to pay $100 US, which is part of the $500 US for the testing, which will be for a test that will be taken at the end of the mandatory 14-day quarantine period. And if you test negative, you'll be released. But if you test positive, you have to do a further 14 days until they can get the 2 negative tests, which is part of the standard for disclosure for release of individuals from quarantine. So we'll go to hear now from Dr. Laws in terms of what she said last evening as it pertains to the region when it comes to COVID-19, the number of deaths, recoveries, and so forth, and also the disclosure of the cases of the $500 fee that will have to be paid when you return to St. Kitts and Nevis.
So the percentage of persons in the Florida area alone, rose sharply. And so in Florida to date, you have over 103,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19. And this is noteworthy because pre-COVID, many of our flights emanated or came from Miami. So now the global economy, based on, again, information from the New York Times, the International Monetary Fund predicts that the global economy will shrink some 4.9% this year. The IMF warned that the global economy faces an even deeper downturn than it previously projected at the beginning of the pandemic. This forecast underscores the magnitude of the work that policymakers are facing. The IMF predicts that reopening will be uneven and protracted. So the gradual relaxation of restrictions is going to be a long process. And policymakers, you are challenged because you have to continue that balance between the public health interventions to fight the outbreak and the facilitation of economic activity. And so it's a long road ahead. In St. Kitts and Nevis, the COVID-19 task force yesterday met with the following stakeholders. At first, in the morning, we met with the hotel operators. The venue for that meeting was the St. Kitts Marriott Hotel. And then in the afternoon, the task force met with the Ministry of Education, the leadership of the Ministry of Education, and stakeholders within the early childhood education sector. And these stakeholder meetings were critical because we discussed the level of preparedness of the hotel industry in terms of reopening, and the level of preparedness in terms of the Ministry of Health and the early childhood sector for reopening. Now, in St. Kitts and Nevis, to date, we have tested well over 450 persons, and as we all know, to date we only have had 15 positive cases. They have all recovered, so at present we have 0 active cases, and it's well over 60 plus days since we would have announced our last case. Now, in terms of quarantine, at present we have 55 persons in government-designated quarantine site, and between January and present, almost 850 persons would have been released from quarantine. Now, I want to spend some time explaining the process that must be followed by nationals who are requesting permission to be repatriated to the Federation. And so if you are overseas and you wish to return home, you must send a letter or an email of application to the Chief Executive Officer of SCASPA requesting same, and you provide the details of your charter, because I must say that our ports remain closed. And then once permission is granted, you will be provided this information. So once you would have returned to the Federation, you would automatically go into quarantine at a government-designated quarantine site. And for now, that site is located in the Fort Lands area. And there is a cost attached to this accommodation. You will be in quarantine for 14 days, and the cost for that duration is US $500 for 14 days. Yeah, please note the cost, US $500 for the 14-day period, and this cost is to be borne by the incoming traveler. Now, at the end of your quarantine period, that's day number 14, you will be sampled and your sample will be sent to our local next generation lab for processing. Again, there is a cost to that. The cost is US $100. Now, part of that fee goes to Next Gen Lab for processing the sample. However, the rest covers the cost for the personal protective gear that must be worn by the health professional to take the sample, and then the sampling requires the use of a swab and a viral transport media. And so that fee covers the cost, the entire cost of sampling. Now, the incoming air traveler is also responsible for providing your own meals and essentials, including laundry. And please note, your local relatives are welcome and are encouraged to assist you with your meals and your laundry. Now, the public health team will monitor you during this 14-day period to ensure that you are not experiencing any of the COVID-like symptoms, and you are provided a WhatsApp number to call or to send a message to upon noticing any of the COVID-related symptoms. You will be discharged from quarantine on day number 14 if your COVID-19 molecular test is negative.
Well, there you had it. That was Chief Medical Officer Dr. Hazel Laws, just outlining what are the new measures for nationals and foreigners entering St. Kitts and Nevis. Like I said, a lot of people have been complaining about, having to pay that amount, while others have others have been giving their views that, it's costing the government to have to accommodate these people and so forth. And somebody did make a valid point that there was this initiative of having people who return to self-quarantine, but at the end of the day, a lot of them were still being, reports surfaced that a lot of them were still walking around Bastille and not staying. And then, the police and the army had to get involved in those people, get involved with those individuals, because at the end of the day, they were still out and about doing their own thing. So it's just something that had to be put in place, but as Dr. Laws would have outlined where the monies will be allocated in terms of swabs and protective gears for those people who will be monitoring and working up at the government facility. Well, that was Voices for Today. It was a condensed version. We had the Premier's press conference at the top of the 11, from 10, and that took a bit of our first hour of the program, and we discussed the reopening of the borders and new measures that are coming on stream. And then we also heard a bit from the Chief Immigration Officer in terms of what exactly is the way forward for, she basically gave an update. She broke her silence on what exactly it is that transpired on Monday with the Haitians. But we'll keep on top of that story in terms of what's next for them and get some questions answered and clarified in terms of when those Haitians came, how they were accommodated, and so forth. But nevertheless, there's still CARICOM representatives, there's still members of the CARICOM family, and immigration officials will find a solution in terms of the way forward, whether or not they'll stay here, whether or not they'll be repatriated to Haiti. That's up to the immigration officials to make a determination on the way forward. Nevertheless, I was Chairman Abel, and that was Voices for Today. Do stay tuned. The quintessential one is up at the top of the hour. News and sports at 6, and we have, sport of programming throughout the day. So do enjoy, stay safe, and don't drink and drive. That was Voices for Today. Peace and love.
Found the sound 98.9
Oh man, I've been needing some new tires. So you're checking? And tires are so expensive these days. So you're in check? If I could only find some that fit my budget.
Boy, TDC Automotive is having a big 3-day sale.
So why didn't you just tell me that before?